everyone, and welcome to Phillies Extra, the baseball show from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm your host, Scott Lauber, and I'm so happy to be joined this week by former Phillies center fielder Doug Glanville. I wanted to do something a little different with this episode. This is our 11th show, and for the previous 10, our guest has been someone with direct ties to the Phillies. We've had several players, JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, Bryson Stott, Jesus Luzardo, and top prospect Aiden Miller. We've had pitching coach Caleb Cotham and hitting coach Kevin Long. We've had two former players, Cole Hamels and Larry Boa, both of whom work for the team now in various capacities. So for a change, I wanted to bring on someone with an outside perspective, with a national perspective. And with the Phillies set to be featured on Sunday Night Baseball for the first time this season, I thought it was a good week to get Doug Glanville, who will be at Wrigley Field in Chicago for ESPN Radio. But if you know anything about Doug, you know that there are a lot of great reasons to chat with him whenever the opportunity comes up. First, he played the game. He was the Cubs' first-round pick in 1991, and he made his major league debut with them in 1996. He got traded over to the Phillies after the 97 season for Mickey Morandini and spent 6 of his 9 big league seasons right here in Philadelphia. He had his best year in 1999, batting .325 with an .833 OPS, as the leadoff hitting center fielder on a Phillies team that was led by Bobby Abreu, Scott Rowland, and Curt Schilling, and managed by Terry Francona. Overall, Glanville batted .277 and stole 168 bases in his career. He has local ties too. Although he grew up in northern New Jersey, Yankees country, he was a Phillies fan. He played in college at Penn and became especially close with late Phillies chairman David Montgomery, a fellow Penn alum who not only led a contingent of team employees to Glanville's father's funeral in 2002, but he also traveled to Asheville, North Carolina to attend Glanville's wedding a few years later. Last year, when the Phillies posthumously inducted Montgomery into their Wall of Fame, Glanville was there to help unveil Monty's Angle, the renamed portion of the outfield wall at Citizens Bank Park that juts out by the 409 foot sign in left center. It was a really, really cool moment. But Glanville is a member of the media now. He writes for The Athletic and hosts a show on the Cubs television network. In addition to his work for ESPN, he also writes for a Substack. And if you've ever written his stuff, it's phenomenal. So I wanted to get his perspective on the Phillies, let's call it an uneven start. And judging by my emails, I think a lot of you would say that uneven is putting it kindly for this season. They're 13-12 going into the series. I also want to get his thoughts on the state of the center field position in baseball today. And we'll see if we can't get him to tell a few fun stories about some of his former teammates, from Rowland and Schilling to Jimmy Rollins as a rookie in 2002. If you stick with me after the interview, I'll share some thoughts and observations about what we're seeing lately from the Phillies, and we'll wrap it up with a reader, viewer, listener question at the end. So without further ado, here's my sit down with Doug Glanville. Doug Glanville, welcome to Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Always good to be back in Philly, even if it's virtual.
So I did a sort of Cliff Notes summation of your baseball life in the introduction to the show. And, although you have, really strong ties to the Phillies, both as a fan of the team growing up and then 6 seasons here as a player, I wanted to invite you this week because unlike most of our guests who are either, Phillies players or staff, you have the objective viewpoint as a member of the media. And you also have the call of Phillies-Cubs. I guess do we call that the Glanville Bowl?
Yeah, it's. I think John Shambi kind of coined that. Yeah, it's my own personal Super Bowl. So yeah.
You have the call on Sunday Night Baseball with John Shambi, and so I'm sure you've been studying up this week. The Phillies started out 7-2, going into this series against the Cubs. They've lost 10 of 16, including a sweep earlier this week by the Mets. So I'll start out with just a very broad question, and you can take this in whatever direction you'd like. Is there an observation you've had so far, maybe from 30,000 feet, about this Phillies team and kind of the start, the uneven, I guess, start that they've had so far?
Yeah, and I think that's a good word, uneven. And when I looked at them almost like from a scouting view going into spring training in the season, you said this team is going to pitch, right? They have a very deep rotation. They got a lot of arms, a lot of looks. And a guy like Dave Dombrowski, he loves velocity. He's going to go out and get arms, and rest assured, like if getting to the trade deadline, he's going to do what he has to do. And sometimes he'll trade like popular players or whatever he needs to do to kind of get the pieces. But he's very good at getting star power. So I saw that through the rotation, and they haven't quite been that sort of sure thing they kind of need to combat what are the fluctuations of offense. And in the Phillies case, the fluctuation is a little bit on the power side, right? The slug side. So it's one thing, you're getting your hits here and there, but are you doing damage? Are you getting the big hits, the crooked numbers? That's kind of the stuff you need to beat the aces. Because, give Jacob deGrom, who's back now, you're not going to get 5 singles in a row off him, okay? You're just not. So your big innings come from that big hit, that situational hit. And when you combine that with the fundamentals and maybe the slug, now you can put up those innings. And they're not quite getting that rhythm. And you combine that with not quite getting the pitching they want, you're going to be up and down.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're getting on base. They're getting on base. They've got, I think, the 3rd or 4th highest on base percentage in the sport right now. They're just not getting that big hit. They're certainly not driving the ball the way we're used to seeing them do it. And as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a good bit of angst right now among the fan base here. A fan base that isn't typically known for its patience. I'm not sure if the majority of it is directed at the bullpen, which has been difficult to trust, or 2/3 of an outfield. And I'll absolve Nick Castellanos here because he swung the bat relatively well. That just hasn't been all that productive. I wanted to ask you about center field. It's a position, it's your old position. Brandon Marsh was hitless in 31 at-bats before he went on the injured list with a strained hamstring. He's going on a rehab assignment this weekend, should be back soon. Yohan Rojas has actually swung the bat well. What's been your view of center field, which has kind of been an unsettled spot now for the Phillies for several years?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the challenge of having that day-to-day center fielder, and I think the challenge is, do you get the glove, then also get the bat? It's not an easy combination because it's such a significant position up the middle. You're responsible for a lot of the bulk of the balls in the outfield. You're backing up. You're covering for the corner guys who may not be as strong defensively, and if you want that bat, and that's the Phillies' signature, to be able to hit and have that extra swing. And look, Marsh is a guy that I like him as a ball player. I think he's, got good sense, in terms of defensively. He's just needed sort of a chance to see lefties. There was a period of, he's got some pop the other way. There's a lot of things you're just sort of looking at him, and I can see why the Phillies said, well, let's just give him a shot. And it just didn't start off well. And so when you do that and you get hurt, then you go back to Rojas. Now you need the depth that you weren't really planning on leaning on so soon. So it has been a revolving door. And it's not necessary that center fielders have to hit, 50 home runs. They have to give you the glove. But if you're not getting the offensive production there, you got to, make up for it somewhere. You got to have it somewhere. Or you have to have such good run prevention that it doesn't make a difference. But the Phillies aren't built for run prevention, or they do it on the pitching side, but it's not necessarily all about the glove work. It's more about outscoring the other team, right? And I think that when that's missing, they're not the Tigers, right? They're not the teams that are going to just like, all right, we're going to lose all these matchups, but we're going to beat you in the 7th, 8th, and 9th because we have the matchups. Phillies are much more geared towards like, I'm going to outscore you, and we'll kind of figure it out. And then we have a good enough bullpen to hold the lead. That has not played into the way they had hoped.
Yeah, I want to ask you kind of a global center field question too. Like, I wrote about this during the offseason, about sort of how that position has evolved into almost more of a defense first position. And you played from 1996 to 2004, which I would contend was sort of a golden age of center fielders, right? Like, just like looking down, like just a partial list of your contemporaries when you played: Andrew Jones, Bernie Williams, Marquise Grissom, Steve Finley, Kenny Lofton, Jim Edmonds, Mike Cameron, Johnny Damon, Carlos Beltran, Torrey Hunter, and of course, the gold standard, Ken Griffey Jr., right? Right now, as we sit here entering the weekend or entering Thursday's games, center fielders have a collective across the league OPS of 690. That would be the 3rd lowest mark ever at the position behind only 2022 and 1943. Last year, center fielders combined for a 697 OPS. So, it's not like this is just a 3-week snapshot of a lack of offense in center field. So I kind of wanted to ask you, like, where do you think, like, is this just cyclical? Are we going through sort of maybe a down cycle, or is the position changing right before our eyes?
There's a lot of layers to it. I'd say, I can start on this front. It's really hard to hit today. All right. Like, and I felt like I played and did well, but it's really tough to hit today offensively. Velocity, max effort, specialization of the bullpen. There's so many factors that just make it harder. So that's one. Two, defense is seen as almost like a single organism, right? You move guys around. You can come up as a rookie now, like Jackson Merrill, be a shortstop and a center fielder, and the guy never played a day in his life in center field.
Right.
So the specialization where you see maybe on the bullpen side, you're seeing it in almost like a reverse way in the outfield, right? Because you see guys like throwing anybody out there and just like, yeah, you'll figure it out. Like Cam Smith or whatever, guys just come up. So, and the young players are conditioned to be willing to play a lot of different positions. They're like, okay, I'm like, Campbell in the Red Sox, like I'm a shortstop and I'm a center fielder, or Sedan Rafaela, or, whoever it is. So you almost don't
playing center field now, right? So yeah.
And you don't know, like, the specialization, like the defensive prowess of like having years and years and years of reps at that position defensively is not really a requirement anymore. And so in theory, you'd say, well, I can put anybody out there, just put a bat out there. But, I'll give you the Tigers as an example. When they broke camp, AJ Hinch told us, their manager, and said, look, we are going to run prevent. So we're going to get a guy like Kreidel or somebody like that who will be able to be the Swiss Army knife. So it isn't about him being the best offensive player in center. It's that he can play all these other positions to give us a chance to put the best guy who's more limited defensively in his position. So it's almost like you have these pieces, and one piece is for the purpose of holding a spot for a certain situation so that you can allow the guy that's less versatile to do what he does with the bat. And so it's sort of a reverse situation. And I think center field has been, sort of the victim of that to certain degrees. And so who is a center fielder? Are they playing every day, or is guys playing left, center, right, and short and second? And, and so it's just created a different culture around it. I know when I came up, I thought of myself as a center fielder. I wasn't even a left fielder. I wasn't even a right fielder. I was a center fielder.
Yeah.
And like that's not, you can't even think that way as a young player anymore. And I think the game has kind of followed.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like you brought up Jackson Merrill, and teams are not necessarily, I think, sort of growing center fielders as much as they're just growing. Hey, this guy's an athlete. Maybe he could play out there. Maybe maybe we could do something. Maybe we can move a guy around the field. And there's maybe a little bit less of like just branding a guy as a center fielder coming up, and that's what he's going to be.
Right. I mean, there's no closers, right? Like, I mean, kind of, like, okay, do we need to label it? And as a result, like, it's situational. And I feel like defense is, and that, move that way. And plus, have the analytics of like where to actually play, exact spots. And, so, will the data show one day that it watered down the position, or would they say like, this was just better as an overall defensive approach? Time will tell, but the individual sort of skill set around center field is just different now.
One more for you on the Phillies. This core, and when I sort of talk about their core, I kind of am talking about Harper, Turner, Wheeler, Nola, Schwarber, Realmuto, and Castellanos. Really, that group of 7. That core has been together now for 3 going on 4 years, which is kind of unheard of in pro sports in 2025. That you've got a group that size that's together for that long. And I think in talking to a lot of them through spring training and whatnot, I think they realize though that their clock is kind of ticking a little bit. Schwarber and Realmuto can be free agents after the season. They're not going to be together forever. I wonder whether you look at it like this core has kind of an expiration date to it, and maybe the Phillies, if they don't win it all this year, and that's a lot to put on any team and say like now or never, but it might look a little bit different next year rather than kind of running it back for another year with all the same guys.
Yeah, I mean, all cores have expiration dates. I mean, it's kind of like an avocado effect, right? Like you kind of like, is it ripe? Is it ripe? Is it ripe? Okay, now we're going to be all in. And then, if you leave it too long, it turns brown in 10 seconds. So you have to have impeccable timing. And now I think Dave Dombrowski is good at that. Like he's going to be all in and then he'll hold people accountable. So I don't think, Philadelphia has to worry about whether they're going to do what they need to do. They usually go get a sixth starter. That's what they usually do. So, and they got a really good bullpen last year in trades, and they just imploded. Like that was just like who would have thought, right? Hoffman, these guys would struggle. But there is, it's limited, and not only that, it's free agency. It's just the reality of, now Schwarber, these guys are going to try to get that next contract, and Real Muto, who was invincible for such a long time, all of a sudden, started to be on the injured list, and Harper had injuries and so on. So, that is true. And that's why the depth matters. The Phillies caught the lightning in the bottle of kind of losing Harper or guys like that and still getting young guys like Stott and Bohm coming up. And like in almost their first year, they're like, okay, let's just figure this out. And that gave them a lot of experience almost prematurely in some ways. That has paid dividends, but they're just knocking on the door still, and they're not quite getting through it. And you can only have so much left in the tank when your players are just aging.
So a former teammate of yours, Jimmy Rollins, is being inducted into the Phillies Wall of Fame this summer, and he's the franchise's all-time hits leader. He's probably on the Phillies Mount Rushmore, right, with Mike Schmidt and Steve Carlton, and I don't know if you'd go Robin Roberts or Richie Ashburn or Chase Utley there. But, in thinking about Jimmy, I think a lot about a story that you told me years ago. I was working on a book about Phillies history, and we talked for a while about a lot of different things. And you told me a really, really fun story about in 2002, Jimmy was a rookie, and he was in a batting practice group with yourself, Scott Rowland, and Bobby Abreu. And maybe Jimmy was not necessarily Jimmy was a confident guy and did a lot of talking and this and that. I wonder if you remember that story and can share a little bit of it in terms of what young Jimmy Rollins was like coming up in 2002.
Oh, wow. I mean, Jimmy was right out of a movie, I'm telling you. And was it 02? I thought it might have been earlier. It was definitely his rookie year. And so, Jimmy gets called up. And Jimmy is Jimmy. He couldn't stop talking. He was so excited, and he's talking. Now I came from this generation of be seen, not heard when you come up. Like you don't say anything. Your veterans do the talking. Scott Rowland was kind of in that mold. Now I was embracing the evolution of players. I called him Rookie 2.0. Mm-hmm. Scott Rowland, not so much, right? He's like, nah, I'm not really cool with this. So Jimmy's in our group. And he's not only talking, he's describing every swing he takes. He's like, oh, did you see that? Oh, look at the backspin. Oh, that's out of here. Oh, don't throw that in here. Oh, I mean, he was talking the whole time. And it might have been like nervous energy and excitement and all that, but it was just Jimmy being Jimmy. And you could see Roland, the steam coming off his head. And, I think he let him do it for a day, maybe two. And then eventually Roland was done. So he pulled Bobby and I aside, and we didn't have a choice. Okay, let's just get it straight. He was like, okay, I'm going to kick him out of the group. I just wanted to talk to you about it and ask you. And it's like, I wasn't that upset. It was kind of fun, but I wasn't going to stop Scott. Scott had his kind of rules and regulations. So I was like, if that's what you need to do, if it's like distracting you. So he kicks Jimmy out of the group, and poor Jimmy, I felt horrible. He's sitting in the corner now, like a dunce cap, and he's not talking at all. And you just felt like, wow, this is he's just watching the game, just sitting there trying not to say he looked like he lost like not just one dog, like a litter of dogs. Like, I mean, it just looked so, Jimmy, that was his game. But see, he came into his own and eventually became that Rookie 2.0 and was announced his presence with authority and played with enthusiasm, and the game needed it. And I appreciated it even as a veteran, and I think he brought a lot of inspiration to the game. And he had to grow as a rookie. I know that I would stand there behind him, or near him during his interviews, and I'd be like, okay, let's just work on that a little bit. And he's talking in his like Oakland lingo, and like nobody know what he was saying. So but Jimmy was great. He was a wise man beyond his years. We used to talk about it, and we come up with strategies. And I was just so proud of the player he became in his career, and he just became a fantastic ball player.
And I think part of, supremely talented, obviously, and a real feel for the game, but was eventually he was allowed to be himself, right? Like, I think he was allowed to kind of play the way he wanted to play, the way that would make him most successful, even if, some veteran guys didn't love it at the beginning, right? I think Jimmy being Jimmy was a big part of his success.
Absolutely. And, he just embraced it. And look, give a lot of credit to Larry Boa too, because, Boa is like ancient school, if there's a word beyond old, but he kind of like loved Jimmy, and he kind of like shortstop, switch hitter, little guy, got to like kind of do, scrappy, hustled. I think Boa just gave him some room, which is like to his credit, because you could see like Boa wanted, an old school guy, would want to like crush that a little bit. And I definitely saw it in the days that I came up, like, don't say anything. So, and every team needs that injection, that catalyst of like remembering why you're here, remembering the joy of when you first got called up. You gotta remember that. I mean, it's a privilege to be like, yeah, I've seen this for 8 years, but you forget like, yeah, I kind of needed that. And Jimmy and I, have always kept in touch. And I remember, when I left for a year, he took my number, because remember, he was 11, then he went to 6, then he went back. And I came back. I'm like, sorry, man, the rules here. But I did give him like a laptop. I felt like I got to give him something. People get Rolexes, and he didn't really want to give it back, but he's like, all right, I got to do this. So, he respected that, but we also respected him.
You played for Larry Boa. You played for Buck Showalter in Texas, Dusty Baker in Chicago.
Yep.
And of course, you played for Terry Francona. And so I don't know if I've ever asked you for like if someone says to you, what's your kind of quintessential Tito story, or your go-to Tito story? And you probably played for him the longest, I think, right? Of all the managers you played for, or close to it. Is there like a go-to Tito story that I'm sure you have a million of them?
Oh my goodness.
Knowing that what a character he is. I covered him for a couple of years at the end with the Red Sox in 10 and 11, but you must have some really good ones.
Oh yeah, Francona was hilarious. Yeah. First of all, well, I know there's like there's one personally where I think of is when I was really struggling. Like my first full season was 98, and at the end I'm like falling off the cliff here. I'm so tired, and I played in every single game, and so I was trying to do 162, and we get into September. And I'm probably like, 1 for 30 something or whatever it is, right? And I feel like the bat is like, a sledgehammer. And Francona says, hey, all right, I know what you're trying to accomplish here. I'm going to give you a day off. You just got to take it. Because at this point, it looks like the bat is actually swinging you. And it's supposed to be the other way around. So I said, all right, I got to take this day. So he gave me my day. And, he was very in tune with you in communication-wise. I always tell this funny story about Bobby Abreu, and Bobby was a funny cat too. And you never could tell, like, is it the language barrier, or is he just messing with you, right? So at one point, I'm going to get this probably wrong because I don't remember exactly the numbers, but I think we got fined when we were late. And Bobby was kind of notoriously late for a period of time, okay? He was just on his own program. So Bobby comes in, and Francona's tired of it. He's like, okay, right now on my desk, I want $250. Just put the money on the desk. I've had it with you, $250. So, okay. So, Francona comes back on his desk. It's $2.50. And Francona's like, what is this? And then he was like, oh, maybe he didn't understand. Maybe it's a language. And Bobby is like stone facing him. And then he's like, I got you. So Francona then didn't know what to do with it. So, he kept it late, and he was a guy that let you play. Like, go. Yeah. We never had like a red light. He was like, go, run, steal bases. I don't care. He just all he cared about was play hard, just play hard. And And that's what he respected. And so he got that respect back because he was consistent about like what he wanted us to value.
Yeah. All right, let me get you out of here on this. This is my 20th year of covering Major League Baseball, and when you've done this long enough, you get used to talking with people who know more about the game than you do. And if you're willing to, learn from them, it's really a lot of fun to be able to do that. But it's really humbling as a writer when any of those people that you cover are also better writers than you are. And you're a terrific writer, as anyone who's read you in the New York Times and The Athletic knows. And now you've got a new place for your writing on Substack, which I've enjoyed getting in my inbox. Tell us a little bit about Welcome to Glanville, where people can read it and what you're trying to do with it, on a regular basis, several times a week, a new entry drops, how this came about and what you want to do with it.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I'm really excited about this. First of all, I love to write, and I've, I actually came into sports media from writing. And ESPN called me, and after seeing my columns in the New York Times, it kind of comes from my parents and really good English teachers in high school. But my dad loved to write poetry from time to time. And when he did, he was inspired. And I, always fed off of that. My mom often used language to change, make social change. So it came from those experiences. And I think what I tried to harmonize and synthesize through writing about baseball was like baseball is so much bigger. It can have so much more of a life impact. And I in my experience, showed sports as a way to bring people together, to unify across different backgrounds. So it meant to me that writing had this certain kind of power, but it also felt like it's how I communicate. So it's very natural for me to write it. It's like I don't have to really think about it. Almost writing, like I start off almost like journal. Like, here's my diary. I'm gonna write, and sort of the ideas come from there. So I created a place called Welcome to Glanville because I wanted to express that I'm also still a fan, and I was always a fan through the game, and I wanted a place to have a direct connection with fans and to interact and hear people out about all these various topics that come through the game. And flow through, my experience, but also what we're all experiencing as fans of the game. And so this place is a community. Glanville is like a town, so to speak. And I, pick out different topics. And today I dropped a piece on Jared Kelenic with the Braves about hitting the ball and watching it, and then getting in trouble because he got thrown out at second base, and learning from Sean Dunston, like hustle is free, and nowadays it's not necessarily hustle as much as like celebration early and then going, oh, it didn't go out, right? So I wanted to capture all these, nuanced aspects of the game, but also the bigger picture, whether it's Jackie Robinson Day. And so it was inspired by the writing world is really challenging now, right? It's hard. I grew up with my parents with the newspaper in their face, and it's like, oh, there were columnists, right? Every week you heard from this columnist. It's so hard to get that, right? And I tried, like I pitched places, and you get at most like a one-off. Okay, you can write about this, but then we don't really need to hear from you. And I wanted to write all the time. So I built it, and I had a lot of help, Carolyn Bork with my marketing side, but it's just a passion of mine. And I just have so much content that I've been sitting on. It's really fun.
Well, like I said, it's great, and anyone who's ever read you knows how thoughtful you are, how talented you are as a writer, and it's been just a lot of fun to see you be able to do it and to be able to put a lot of that out there. Doug, I know you've got a lot going on, and I know, like me, you're going to be traveling to Chicago for Phillies-Cubs this weekend. So I want to tell you how thankful I am that you've shared some of your time with us here at Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'll see you on Saturday or Sunday at Wrigley Field.
All right, Scott. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye,
Philly.
I want to thank Doug Glanville again for being with us. For our Reporter's Notebook segment, Rob Thompson said something the other day that it's been on my mind. It was Wednesday morning, a few hours before the Phillies played the finale of their series with the Mets in New York. We were in the visiting manager's office at Citi Field, and Thompson was sitting there at the desk. The Phillies had lost 3 games in a row, a few hours before they would drop their 4th in 10 innings. And he was asked about the team's mood. He started to say that everyone was in good spirits, that they've been through tough stretches before. And then he said this, quote, "I feel like everyone around us is panicking." Yeah, just a little bit. And look, it isn't surprising, right? It's the world we live in. We tend to look at baseball as 162 one-game seasons rather than one 162-game season. And because there's a game almost every day, there's almost always an outcome that we can analyze and overanalyze and reanalyze until the next game comes the very next day. And while that's great for business, if you have a show on sports talk radio or a column in the newspaper, it can be absolutely maddening for the people who are actually involved in the competition. Because if you spend too much time on any one game or any one at bat or any one pitch, you'll drive yourself crazy. It's why baseball players, more than athletes in any other sport, talk about staying on an even keel. That's usually their default. It's their best bet for success. When they don't, well, that's when you get Alec Boehm slamming his helmet and spiking his bat and answering questions about his maturity. But after listening to Thompson and then seeing the Phillies get walked off in 10 innings and swept by the Mets, I did think it was relevant to ask about the climate within the clubhouse because everyone knows what the stakes are, right? The Phillies won more games in 2024 than they did in 2023, and they won more games in 2023 than they did in 2022. But they also lost one round earlier in the playoffs in each of those years. Through it all, the core of this team has been intact, but they're not going to be together forever. JT Realmuto and others have talked openly, and JT did it right here on this show, about like a sense of urgency to win the World Series this year, or maybe they'll get broken up. So when you get 3 extra base hits in a 3-game series in New York, and when you're tied for third in the majors in on-base percentage, but only 11th in runs per game, and when you're 13-12 after starting 7-2, it's worth taking the temperature of the team's best player, especially after Bryce Harper observed recently that some players, notably Boehm and Brandon Marsh, seem to be carrying an inordinate amount of weight on their shoulders. So I asked Harper if the Phillies were able to balance the pressure to win with finding their way early in the season, because it is still early. It's not even the end of April yet. And here's some of what he said. He said, quote, "I'd rather you guys say it's a little early. I don't like that. Just because we should be wanting to play good baseball all year long, from April all the way to November. Obviously, that's not going to happen. You're going to go through ups and downs. You try to stay as even-keeled, there's that word, as you can. But we're a good team in here, and we expect to win. We've just got to win. That takes care of everything, right? It takes care of mindset. It takes care of what you're feeling or anything else like that. It doesn't matter if one guy's struggling. We come to win, and winning takes care of it all. As a team, we have to be better. That's a really good Mets team over there, but it doesn't matter. As a team, I think we've got to really understand what we want to do, how we want to do it, where we want to go as a club. We've got to play better baseball." So for Bryce Harper, winning alleviates pressure. But I think how the Phillies handle the pressure to win will be a storyline throughout the season, just because they have so much riding on this year. Okay, let's move to our last segment. We call this Hit and Run, where we take a question from a reader or a listener or a viewer. This is a good time then to tell you that you can submit a question by email or on any of my social media accounts, which you see listed right here. This week's question comes from @MoreyBall76 on X, who asks, "Why haven't the Phillies found a left fielder or center fielder in the last decade?" And there's a follow-up question from the same person. "Do you think the Phillies will call up Justin Crawford shortly?" Thanks for the questions. So let me hit you with a few numbers. Let's go back to 2018, the year before the Bryce Harper era began, and the season when the Phillies really started to kind of turn the corner away from their rebuild and back towards some level of contention. Since then, since 2018, they actually ranked 7th in baseball with a 786 OPS from their left fielders. Now, most of that production is from Rhys Hoskins in 2018. Remember, he played left field. And Kyle Schwarber in 2022. Both of them were really bad defensively, though, which explains why the Phillies ranked 17th in WAR, wins above replacement, from left field. Now, center field is a different story. As we talked about with Doug Glanville, the Phillies ranked 25th in OPS and 24th in WAR at that position since 2018, and it's been a revolving door out there. Odubel Herrera has played most of the games for them in center field since 18, pretty closely followed by Brandon Marsh, Johan Rojas, Roman Quinn, Scott Kingery, Adam Hazley, and Matt Vierlin. So yeah, it's been a struggle for the Phillies to find answers, especially in center field. Marsh was supposed to be the guy. You remember they traded Logan O'Hoppe to the Angels to get him at the trade deadline in 2022, and they thought they'd found their center fielder of the future. And I wrote about this the other day. Marsh is going on a minor league rehab assignment to Lehigh Valley this weekend that will serve two purposes: to test his mild hamstring strain, but also to reset his season. He was hitless in 31 at-bats when he went on the IL, and not to be overly dramatic about it, but this feels like kind of an inflection point for him. The Phillies are finally giving him a chance to play every day against righties and lefties. And if he doesn't seize it, I think they're going to have to concede that he's not the guy. Look, you can't have a star at every position. And as we mentioned in our interview with Doug Glanville, offense is down across the league in center field, which has turned into more of a defense-first position. But if you're not getting more thump in left field, then you need it from center field, and vice versa. It's difficult to be a really good offensive team if you have below average production in both of those places. Okay, we'll leave it there for this week. Quick programming note: every episode of Phillies Extra is available on the Inquirer's YouTube channel or by clicking the Phillies tab on Inquirer.com. If you've missed any of our interviews, we've had some really good guests. Please give those a listen. That'll do it for us this week. Thanks again to my guest, former Phillies center fielder Doug Glanville, and to our producer, Angelica Irizarry, for pushing all the buttons that help us put this show together. Until next week, I'm Scott Lauber. Thanks to everyone for listening, watching, and of course for reading the Philadelphia Inquirer.